If you could afford one, are you going to take it out and go get Chinese food in it? Probably not. Not everybody can afford a Le Mans winning race car. Shocking to hear, but it's true. And I certainly can't. And probably most other people can't. When you can't, there's still the opportunity to drive those cars in a different form. And that is in a recreation or a kit car or something like that. And people ask me, like, do these cars have value? Are they worth buying? Are they worth driving? And as an historian, I have to say, yes. As a mechanic, as a restorer, yes. And I'll explain why. We worked on a Jaguar D Type recreation by a company called Proteus. And it belonged to Jay Lamb, the founder of the 24 Hours of Lemons, and one of his fabulously weird cars that he owns and he takes and goes shopping with. And he was like, I need to get this sorted out. It's not really sorted out. And that's what we did a lot with his cars, was get them so they went fast and did what they looked like they would do. So he sent it up, and I was a little, a little curious because I never worked on, one of these before. I'd worked on plenty of Jaguars, and it came up, and I'm like, the more I worked on it, the more like, this makes sense. Because the Jaguar D Type, just as a little history, they won Le Mans in 55, 56, and 1957. In 1957, they took first, second, third, fourth place, and I think also seventh place. It was a monstrous victory for that car. Those cars, a real D Type from the day, are worth anywhere between and, believe it or not, $22 million one sold for. And it depends on its race history. If you could afford one, are you going to take it out and go get Chinese food in it? Probably not. Jade was like, I want that experience. I want that look. I want that feel. I want those noises. But I want to spend like $100,000. And he found this at an auction and purchased it and got a good deal on it. And it's pretty close. Now, this company Proteus built these in England. And it's technically not a kit car. It's more of a recreation. There's a difference, to me at least. A kit car is, back in the 60s, 50s and 60s, if you were unsatisfied with the body of your car, you could take, a Kellison body, or somebody would make these bodies. You'd put it on top of a Corvette, or you'd put it on top of this. It was a kit. And they delivered the pieces, and they put it on there. And they were valid, interesting vehicles, not terribly well built. They were built in their backyard. And there were other companies that would make a recreation. What that was that's the whole car. So this came as a Jaguar D Type with an engine. It ran, you turned the key, and you drove it. You didn't have to put an engine in it. You didn't have to build anything. You just took it. And they built this, but they built it very similar to the original D Type. One of the key design elements of a D Type was they had a monocoque center. Now, up to that point, most race cars had tube frames in them. Monocoque was rocket science. And what that was, monocoquing is using like aluminum panels, making box panels to make the strength. And cars use monocoque all the way up until carbon fiber really kicked in the 80s. And it's very strong and it's very light. So the center section of it is monocoque, and they have a frame hanging off the front and the suspension hanging off the back. And they built this replica just like that. And same geometry in the front, same monocoque aluminum in the middle. The body was aluminum. And a lot of cheaper kit cars, they just make them out of fiberglass, and that's not great. This is hand-formed aluminum that they used a place in Poland to build it, because there was a lot of aluminum manufacturers of aircraft, believe it or not, and these factories that were laying fallow, that they hired these guys and started building car bodies with them. And it's pretty nicely made. This car, as you took it apart, like the interior looked the business, the engine looked the business, everything looked the business. And the benefit of the car is A, it's not $6 million. B, it did use some modern parts on it. So the consumable areas, like the brakes, were off of a 60s or 70s Jaguar like XJ6. So not expensive. They were pretty inexpensive to buy and replace, and we built the calipers and got 4-pot calipers up front, which is more than the D Type ever had. And in the back, you had the independent rear suspension, also from that era Jaguar, which is easy to work on, easy to find parts for. The original D Type had these strange trailing arms. It was actually a pretty complex and expensive rear end to put together. So it was a simple rear end, but the sheet metal looked perfect. And the D Types, as they evolved, 55, 56, 57, had very different looks. So you can choose which look you wanted. They had long nose, they had short nose, they had ones with the bubble behind the driver, they had ones with a cockpit like a fighter plane, they had ones that had windshield that went across the front, they had one with a wing that went off the back. And Jay's car, I think, is kind of the perfect spec. And it's the long nose, which is very elegant looking, more like an E-type, and has the hump behind the arrow hump behind the driver, but no wing, but has the single cockpit side and then the covered passenger side. And it looks so good. And we got it all sorted out and drove it, and it was just magnificent. It made all the sounds. It drove like it's on the Dunlop wheels of the period. It's on period tires, and you get to drive it with a four-wheel drift. And I've driven race cars and I've driven all kinds of things that stick to the ground. There's nothing like putting an older race car in a four-wheel drift. And this is what like Fangio and these guys did back in the day, where you played with the lack of grip rather than the grip itself. And you got the car to break loose. And it's not drifting. It's not the rear butt sticking out. The whole car just slides as a unit through the corners, and you just let it slide. And it's a beautiful balletic feeling as you make it work. And this car did all those things. So similar to the real thing. And I've driven a Racing XJ120 on the track, and I've driven a few really fancy Jags like that. And this had all those feelings for very little money and a lot of reliability. It had the 4.2 liter in it. Instead of the time, it would have been a 3.8 in the race car. But you can't visually tell the difference. It was all polished and beautiful. We actually spent some time correcting under the hood to make it look even more period correct. And it had the dry sump tank in it. Now, it wasn't a dry sump engine. That would have been a lot of work and very expensive to do. But it looked like it had the dry sump on it. I would say 95%, I would say even higher than that, of people who saw it would think it was the real thing. Now, here's the conundrum, right? People are like, oh, well, it's not the real thing. But if it brings the same enjoyment to the driver, if it brings the same enjoyment to the people looking at it, and they think that's one of the most beautiful cars I've ever seen, then what's wrong with that? As long as you're not presenting it as the real thing. I took Jay's car to a couple of shows, and these are real car guys and older car guys who know what that car is. And most every of them walked up and go, where did you get a D Type? Are you working on a D Type in your garage? This is an amazing D Type. And you smile and let them chatter for a little bit, and you're like, it's not a real D Type. And guess what? It doesn't change their attitude at all. They still appreciate the way it looks. They still appreciate everything about it. And that's really what cars are about, right? It's about enjoying the car, enjoying the presence of it, enjoying the driving of it. It doesn't have to be that car. You just have to be honest about what you're doing. Now, these cars do have their drawbacks, and they're few, but they're legitimate because you have to be honest about what it is. Can you take it on these grand tours, the California Mille? No, it's not a real car. Can you enter it into the historics at Monterey? No. Can you take it to the classic Le Mans? No, you can't, because it's not the real car. But that's not what you got it for. Most people get these cars so they can drive them every day. And that's how they should be enjoyed. Take it out on the weekend for your own drive. Take it to where you want to go. Take it on vacation somewhere. It's for you to enjoy the car, right? And for somebody else to look at it and enjoy it. I mean, odds are that if you have the $6 million D Type, you can afford to do the Mille and something like that. Odds are, if you have a clone or a copy or a kit car, maybe your budget isn't quite that to spend $20,000 on a tour. So, fine. Don't worry about it. They're perfectly acceptable for what they are. You don't need to go on a big tour. You take your own tour in these cars. So I have no problem with recreation cars. In fact, Jaguar themselves started building continuation cars exactly built on the same blueprints of the earlier cars, and they would sell them to you for quite a bit of money. Other manufacturers, Shelby did that to himself with the 4000 series Cobras. He was like, "Oh, I found some more," and they started building Cobras again. And people are like, "Well, that's not a real Cobra." Yes, it is. Well, that's not a real D Type. If Jaguar built it, it is. It might not be an original, but it is. There are only so many D Types in the world. Just using the D Type as an example. There's only a few dozen of them in the world. What's wrong with there being a few more for people to see and enjoy and love? Nothing wrong with that, because that is what owning cars is all about.
Successful car purchasing is all about knowing your buying power and being able to move quickly. And the best way to do that is getting pre-qualified with Premier Financial Services. Call one of these numbers, speak to one of their representatives, fill out their application, and then you'll know exactly how much car you can buy. You'll approach a seller, tell them you're already qualified, you've got your simple lease set up from Premier Financial, and you'll be able to close very, very quickly. That's why Premier is one of the most powerful partners in the world of exotic car financing, and that's why I turn to them every time I go out and try to buy something crazy.